A little preview of what we'll be talking about today. We'll be covering two different topics that are very closely related and importantly are very closely related. We'll be talking about unified service delivery, which, as you'll see in the next several minutes of discussion, really covers multiple service organizations, not just IT, but several others. And we'll be focusing the second half of our presentation in speaking about HR specifically, since that's one of the very important service towers where we've seen our customers doing service management related work. So the unified service delivery topic, we'll cover an overview of that, introduce the concept, we'll go through some use case examples, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's involved in implementing unified service delivery. And throughout all of this, we'll have Nick provide some really helpful background information from the implementation, the very successful implementation that he performed with a major university in New York. We'll provide that information for unified service delivery, and then we'll talk about HR case management specifically. And again, we'll introduce you to the concept of HR case management for those of you who may be new to it. We'll talk through some use case examples, and again, we'll relate that back to some of the project delivery work that Nick had been involved in. And then finally, I'll conclude with a little bit of a discussion of advanced capabilities around HR requests. So to start the topic of unified service delivery, I thought I'd give a little bit of context. Within our enterprise customers and some of the large institutions that we work with, really there are three platforms that we see at the highest level in the organization. And those three platforms are the applications related to the line of business that a particular customer is in. So these are business applications. These are unique to each of the vertical markets, whether it's healthcare or it's education, or manufacturing, or online social media. Everybody has their set of business applications that are critical to their business or to their enterprise. And in addition to that, we have two other very important platforms. There's, of course, the ERP, which is really common across a large swath of vertical markets. So the common needs around cash management, inventory, managing employees within a core HR system, for example. All of these fall within an ERP system that, as shown in sort of the cloud, this is one area where we're seeing movement, of course. We're seeing movement from legacy on-premise applications into the cloud. So, of course, Oracle and SAP and the traditional vendors are active in this space, as well as some new entrants in the cloud market. And then the third component, what we're really going to be talking about today, is service management. And service management, like ERP, service management is an area that's very active in terms of moving into the cloud. And what you'll see over the next several slides, we look at service management from the standpoint of not just IT or any particular service organization. We look at it in a unified context. We look at service management as a discipline, a set of processes, and a set of technology that can really be leveraged across several service organizations that have similar needs. So service management as a general concept then is really about how employees and outside parties engage with service provider organizations. So, the way I kind of think about it is service management, of course, is not about taking the actual orders or taking the actual enrollment for classes or dealing with the actual providing of medical services. Service management is about how service providing organizations take work in, complete that work, and report back out to their customers. And so service management governs interactions with employees. And so you'll have service organizations like HR and IT, finance, facilities, legal. All of these teams are being requested by employees throughout the organization to do work for them, to help with things, to help resolve issues, to fulfill requests. And it's the portion of work that these teams do that is really under everybody else's control. All the other employees outside that department kind of control the amount of tickets that are coming in, if you want to think of it in a ticketing context. But in addition to just employees, service management can help with the relationship that goes outside the organization as well. And so it's a partner and customer-facing discipline as well as just internal employees. So we see service management being applied, for example, within the managed service provider space. Service management, of course, is an important component of providing managed services within the IT sector. And service management is also an important way to manage processes where marketing is a central component of customer interactions. So service management as a broad concept is really what we're talking about today when we talk about unified service delivery. So at a high level, we look at service management and the process of taking in work, for example. We look at that as spanning multiple service organizations, as I said. And really what it's about is finding all of the common processes, the common technology, the common solutions that can span all of the service towers within an organization. I use the term service tower, which we'll come back to several times throughout the presentation today. But this slide shows kind of an example or a way to think about service towers within an organization. Each of those service towers, whether it's going from the left to right, whether it's HR, finance, real estate, or sometimes called facilities, IT, the legal team, or the last tower is shown as a general request capability, which I mentioned earlier we'll talk about at the end of the presentation. All of these service towers have similar needs in terms of how they take in work. And those needs go beyond just work intake. They also have similar needs when it comes to service level agreements, similar needs from a metrics and reporting standpoint, security model, the ability to reassign work from one service tower to a different service tower. So all of these common capabilities can be provided not just in a fragmented manner, which is what we see most of our customers are dealing with today. They'll have a service management platform for IT. If they have service management within HR, it will be a separate ticketing system. They'll have a different intake mechanism for the legal team. Often we'll see that email is being used. And so service management is not really spanning more than one tower for many of our customers. So unified service delivery is our approach to applying service management across multiple service towers within an organization. And so I thought I'd invite Nick to talk a little bit about unified service delivery, since it was one of the key objectives that he worked with the university in delivering. So Nick, would you mind taking us through unified service delivery with your customer?
Yeah, so to set the stage a little bit, like Matt was talking about, similar needs, similar goals. So here what I want to talk through is what the similar challenge that this university found that existed in IT, it existed in finance, it existed in HR. And the challenge really broke down to kind of 5 major themes that they wanted to focus on from a holistic global perspective. And those were unmeasured and unmanaged service levels from a global perspective. You might have individual groups that are doing a good job measuring their services that they're providing and doing metrics, but on a whole there was not a, again, global viewpoint of how are all of the services across all of the service towers doing. The second was the global nature of the university. They had people in China, in North Africa, in America, trying to do similar things, in some cases using the similar tools, but the tools have often been stovepiped into kind of Frankenstein-type monsters. So we wanted to make sure we solved globally for the university, and so we made sure we had representation then from those areas. The third challenge was non-standardized and non-scalable administrative support model. So the ability to add on new service centers or new service towers took years to do, and tons of money in project overhead to bring on new service towers. The fourth, inconsistency in user experience. Like Matt was talking about, HR had a different system, a different portal, a different site, a different number, a different email address, whatever, to get support than if you were needed to call somebody in IT versus somebody in IT that was maybe in Shanghai was yet a different experience. So they really wanted to bring to their students a unified experience. And the fifth, disparate business functions and systems, which is common. We see that with most of our customers. The success factors that they wanted to try to achieve is have the voice of the community. We don't want to just talk to IT and just talk to finance and HR. We want to talk to the customers that those groups serve and make sure we incorporate requirements from them. Second success factor, provide a clear map for the community as how to access each service. We wanted to remove the barriers, the SharePoint sites, the random links that people bookmark, and provide a clear place where people could get to what they need. Establish efficient cross-service center processes. So this involved having a meta process that IT, finance, and HR all agreed to a shared high-level meta process that they would all partake in. Implement a common set of tools, metrics, terminology, and this is where we really got the phrase as common as possible, as different as necessary. We tried to view each requirement, each decision that came out. Is there a way to do this in a common way that will scale for all service centers rather than just take requirements at their face value and not really drive value across the global users of the system? Next, develop a process that facilitates the intake and onboarding of new service centers. So we wanted to make sure this was repeatable, that they could bring on legal, they could bring on facilities, they could bring on additional groups, additional service centers that weren't part of the first phase of our project. Next to last, ensure a discipline of continuous improvement based on community feedback. So surveys, metrics, continually out there, finding out how we were doing. And then lastly, leverage best practices through our consulting group.
Great. So, having set kind of the stage at a high level around challenges and key success factors for unified service delivery, I thought I'd throw a kind of a classic example from a use case standpoint of where you can kind of relate to the need for a unified approach to service delivery, and that, of course, is with onboarding. Onboarding is something that you can approach from a lot of different from the perspective of different service towers. Of course, working in ServiceNow, we often approach it from the standpoint of IT, but of course, onboarding is about a lot more than just IT. In fact, IT is kind of a small piece of the overall puzzle from an onboarding standpoint. Yet, the approach to onboarding from a service delivery standpoint really is very much something that we as ServiceNow practitioners should be familiar with. And that is really about coordinating tasks across different groups of people within an organization. And so coordinating tasks is really, I think, from a system standpoint, that task coordination is really the essence of unified service delivery approach, where the service delivery involves multiple service organizations. In this example, HR, finance, facilities, IT, all coming together and contributing one piece to a larger process that spans all of the towers. So I offer this as an example because I think many of us can relate to HR being involved in accepting offers, creating person records, scheduling training, executing new employee onboarding. We know that finance is often involved in the payroll aspect of onboarding somebody. Facilities or real estate, they're tasked with actually setting up a workplace for somebody. And IT, of course, we're involved in the establishment of identity record, granting access, setting up computers. And so what winds up happening is when you have fragmented service delivery, you wind up sending a lot of untrackable emails between these teams, for example. I can't tell you the number of implementations of onboarding I've done where an email is sent off to a facilities team or it's sent off to finance, and it's kind of send and forget. You know, you send the email out and you hope that that team is going to take action. And there's not a system or a good mechanism for really following through on task completion. And so ServiceNow, of course, provides a platform, but from a process standpoint, there's the need to see the onboarding process at a higher level, to step out of IT and see this as applying across an organization. And so I know, Nick, that I know that there was a similar need to offer both pure IT and pure HR case, as well as mixed use cases with the university. So I'm going to invite you to speak about that, but I think Mike also wanted to mention a poll that he just sent out.
Thanks, Matt, for the handoff. Yeah, we're going to kick off our first of 2 polls today. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that right now. For those of you who, for some reason, don't have a visual today, I'll be sure to read the question and results out loud. So our first poll question is, has leadership in your organization identified onboarding process improvements as a high priority in the near term? So we'll give everybody about 10 seconds, 15 seconds to answer, and then we'll close it up and share the results with you. Votes are still coming in. Thank you to all those participating. All right, we're going to go ahead and close it up. So 65% of you voted in our first poll, so thank you for that. So again, question out loud, has leadership in your organization identified onboarding process improvements as a high priority in the near term? 58% said yes, 25% said no, and 17% said I don't know. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Matt.
And I'm going to pass it over to Nick. So Nick, tell us about the university and some of these mixed use cases.
Yeah, so this slide illustrates what you might already be thinking in your mind. So what does this look like in real life? So I'm going to walk through kind of 3 different use cases, starting from left to right. So how does a task get created, incident in this case? For this university, it was a student can't access email, so they might call up the service desk. The service desk is going to log an incident, and then task number 6 and task number 7 maybe get created automatically. Maybe one is an escalation task, but in either case, both those tasks are assigned to IT groups, support groups, who might look into the student's credentials in AD, might verify that they are still an active student and they are able to keep their account or whatnot. The second is more of a mixed case. So an employee might call the HR service desk, reporting a problem that they are not able to access the HR portal, for example. So you can easily see that would be something that somebody in their mind might think is related to an HR problem. Well, in fact, HR does some looking into it. Yes, this person is an employee. Yes, this person should be able to access the portal. And at that point, maybe it's potentially a hardware issue or a network issue, and they need to get IT involved. So here's where the HR case or the HR case manager might create a task for IT to check on the credentials of the person or check the network components that would be potentially the issue here. So there you can see the HR case is owned by HR, but they're involving IT in the work to resolve that case. So here we are not, back to the challenge, we are not transferring that student or that employee to IT. We're not having them walk to another building on campus. We're not even doing a warm transfer where we transfer their name and number to an IT person. It's purely staying with the HR service department or service desk. And the last is a pure HR case example. Maybe the employee didn't receive their paycheck. HR looks into it, and it's because they owed parking fines to the campus police, for example. And so that's something that could be resolved within HR without involving any additional service towers. Now, if you jump below the center part of the slide beneath the line, here we're kind of looking at it from a work queue perspective. Who's resolving, who's working on tasks. So from a service desk perspective, from a fulfiller perspective, everything's a task. So we have IT working their task list. They're going to work task 6 and 7, which are both came into the IT service desk, and they're going to work task number 9, which happened to come in through HR. So that's really not a problem. We're not asking IT staff to be working out of an HR case system and out of an IT system. So there's power in them using the same system, the same forms, the same look and feel as they're used to. And the other thing that was powerful is we did not want, or this university did not want, to have to reset the caller's expectations. If they were told that we're going to try to resolve this issue in 24 hours, IT was not free to reset that expectation. Sorry, it's going to be 2 days or 3 weeks. So there's a note there that talks about the IT task is in support of it, whatever SLAs that the HR case carried with it. So that was all geared around trying to maintain a consistent experience and provide the best level of support, regardless of who was transacting tasks behind the scenes.
Great. So, to round out our discussion of unified service delivery, we want to talk a little bit about, what's involved in the delivery. And the approach we take, we call it as common as possible and as unique as necessary. The as common as possible, I alluded to this earlier when we introduced unified service delivery, but this is really about looking for opportunities to leverage one design or one process, one approach across as many service towers as possible. I mentioned earlier that this is often seen in the intake part of service delivery, and that's certainly true. You can see in the screenshot on the right, there's common needs across service organizations to collect contact information, to identify the type of contact, to identify the location of the contact, and then go through some kind of categorization exercise where you want to identify a business service that's being impacted. And so we take an approach where we use business service as a way to identify really what are the critical, who's the correct service tower to really take the next step, to start dealing with an issue that maybe does need to be handled in a unique way. You need to bring HR expertise to bear on resolving an issue. Or as Nick had alluded to earlier, you need to bring IT expertise to bear. Or you need someone in IT to perform a password reset, or whatever the unique processes are within the service towers. You want to move as much as you possibly can out of that category and into a common approach. So this doesn't just apply to intake. As I mentioned earlier, this is also something that applies to metrics and to SLAs and to the assignments of tasks, collaborating or coordinating between towers. There's a huge opportunity for taking a single uniform process. And of course, probably the best benefit of a unified approach is the leverage that's occurring at the highest levels of the organization, which is the continual service improvement is now something that is being owned at a very high level within the organization that's spanning multiple service towers, rather than each of the service towers maturing and improving their service delivery model independently of all of the others. And so I know, again, Nick, this is something where you can relate directly back to the work you did with the university in the approach that you took.
Yeah, I sure can, Matt. So here's kind of 6 key steps that we found working with this university that I thought was worth repeating and driving home the points on. So the first is identify who the customers are at a very high level and by business function. So who are the customers of IT? Who are the customers of HR? Who are the customers of finance? that helps set the context of audience and what might the language that you would need to use to identify your services be. An employee of the university might not think of email or learning management systems in the same way that a student would. And so identifying those customers is key, which feeds into the next, and that's identifying the services. So once you've identified the customers, then identify the services for each business function, so IT, HR, and finance. Now what you're going to come up with is you're going to come up with a bunch of duplicates. You're going to have IT identifying services, that HR is identifying services, and finance is identifying the same service, all slightly different, using different names, different terminology because their audiences are different. But number 3 is going to be a very difficult exercise for most organizations, and that's how do we remove the duplicates? How do we consolidate? How do we normalize across these very different focused areas? So this really needs to be performed by VPs or people high enough in the organization that will be able to make a decision and understand the pressures of their business function and have it work across the service towers or the business functions. So that's a key point. Number 4 is discuss the duplicates where they are necessary. In some cases, IT is going to have IT human resource systems, for example, as a service, and HR is going to have something that seems to contradict, seems to be a duplicate, HR systems and technology. There are going to be cases where duplicates are necessary. Maybe they're completely separate support groups. Maybe there's contractors or outsourcing agreements. And in the service model, it makes sense to have them completely separate. And that's fine. This unified service delivery model doesn't break down. But at least everyone comes to an understanding of what are the services, why are there duplicates, and they're managing accordingly. Number 5 is owner of the service list, who comes up with this, needs to be empowered and capable. So I already talked about that. It needs to be somebody high enough in the organization that in setting these, it's going to drive user behavior for many things in these business functions. And then 6, if there's a committee, the committee needs to be leveraged to review the service list, review what's coming out in terms of duplicates and the justification for having duplicates and who's going to support at what level and which tier. But I haven't found that a committee is useful in creating that list to begin with. So that's a little bit just from my experience, but that was the case in this university that I recently implemented USD for.
Great. And just to give some context, we've been talking a lot about HR and IT. We've alluded to a few other examples. But just to give you a sense of the breadth of experience that Fruition Partners has had, we've actually taken unified service delivery into the service towers that I'm showing on the screen right now. And then, Nick, I know that you could speak a little bit about what's been done and what the roadmap with the university is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for the University of New York, we had our phase 1 project was really HR, IT, and decision support. So the item almost all the way to the right. Those all 3 went live within the first phase of the project. So we kind of had 3 work streams covering those 3 service towers. As I said, one of the key challenges and one of the key success factors that the university wanted to encounter and make sure existed was they had a roadmap of finance and legal and facilities and student services that needed to come on at some point in the future. So how can we make it so we can bring them on without having projects to retrofit the entire system and add all this functionality again because they might have slightly different requirements. So I think the lesson learned there was it's very effective to go live with several service towers at the same time because it forces you to have some of the difficult, common as necessary discussions with not just IT making all the decisions. So since we've moved on to phase 2 and phase 3 projects with this university where we're doing student services, where we're doing finance, and we're seeing some real efficiencies come out of those projects for the university.
Great. So with that background on unified service delivery, we also, as we said at the beginning, we want to talk about HR specifically today. And service, certainly, outside of IT, from a service delivery standpoint, HR is, certainly one of the most important service towers. And so I thought I'd give just a little bit of a set the background on, what are we really talking about when we say HR case management? Of course, HR case management is a component of ServiceNow that was introduced, I think in its first version, it was introduced in, I believe it was Berlin, and it has since been upgraded in the upcoming Dublin release. And so that's something that we work with our customers to implement as a foundation or as a single component of the overall unified service delivery approach. But HR case management is really, it's about how employees engage HR. And of course, as we're familiar with in IT, there's always going to be multiple channels of communication, which I'm showing in iconic form there. And then, what are they actually doing? They're getting assistance with HR services. So they're getting help with benefits. They're getting help with talent management or compensation. So all of the things that HR does on an operational or on a transactional basis, these are all things that employees at some point are going to have an issue or a question or need assistance with. And so it's through the HR case management process that they're able to engage HR as a service organization. And of course, another component is resolving issues. So you might have a payroll discrepancy, or you might need help with an insurance claim. And then finally, within the employee relations space, if you have an employee relations group that has a need to track the information or to journal as they interact with employees, to journal when you had a conversation with an employee, to journal when you had a conversation with a manager, when you set up a meeting, when a letter was sent or when an email was sent. All of those things that that an employee relations group can be doing as they operate, having an effective service management platform such as ServiceNow, where you can do that journaling as you go along, really makes it much more effective to come back after the fact and understand not just your metrics about employee relations, but be able to quickly understand any particular issue very quickly, just as you would need to understand incidents in any of the other service towers, whether it's IT or it's facilities or legal. So that's kind of at a high level what HR case management is all about. And, in terms of what the business problem is that it's solving, what we see is that a lot of large HR departments, they don't do any ticketing for the questions or cases that their employees or outside parties are generating. So a lot of them, they'll have the shared service center. They'll have the HR phone number or the single HR inbox where this type of work intake comes. But they're ultimately relying on untrackable emails, untrackable phone calls, and they're using paper forms. And so, what this winds up doing is that because of this, HR is hindered in delivering their services with efficiency, which, efficiency is really about not letting things fall through the cracks and having the tracking that you need to turn things around quickly. Consistency is about providing, and we've echoed this a couple times already, but about providing a consistent user experience. So, two employees who have a similar request from HR, which might be some information about the 401k plan, they should expect to get a response to that with some consistency. From a compliance standpoint, the policies and procedures that are important to enforcing on a case management process are so much more difficult to do without a single ticketing platform to manage through. Proactive communication is all about letting employees know proactively, hey, your case has been accepted, your case is about to be resolved, your case is closed. All of that communication can be, to a large extent, a lot of it can be automated. But this gets the HR organization out of reaction mode, where you're waiting for that employee to check back sometimes a second, third, or fourth time on the status of what really should be a ticket. And then finally, from a reporting standpoint, you're now going to gain visibility for the first time. You're going to gain visibility into both the demand for this kind of work coming into HR, the demand for assistance, for resolving of issues within HR, and you'll also start to understand your capacity for meeting that demand. How many people do you really have staffed within benefits administration? How many do you have within payroll? How many do you have within each of the areas within an HR organization? Do you have the people that you need to meet the demand that's coming in from an intake standpoint? Of course, reporting and metrics are an important part of being able to make decisions around that. And so, Nick, I know this is also something where you wanted to highlight a couple of the high priorities for the customer that you worked with within HR specifically.
Yep, sure did, Matt. So the two I wanted to highlight was around consistency. Leveraging unified service delivery allowed the university I worked with to figure out what did they want across the service towers, across the domains. What did they want the first response SLA to be? What did they want resolution to look like in terms of did they want to did they want to have a target resolution, whether it was an IT incident or an HR case? And really that helped or how they helped get to that consistency of feel and SLA was most times somebody calling HR, they had no idea that the item being entered, the service request being entered, or the case being entered was going into the same tool, was going into the same system that IT was using. So consistency, they got very familiar, the employees, the students got very familiar with, I have a service request, is what they called all of it. Incident, HR case, or normal requests in ServiceNow. And so there was a real consistency around how the users were being served. And then from a measurement standpoint, kind of hitting on that reporting point, from a measurement standpoint, HR wasn't developing separate reports or didn't have to develop separate reports on how their performance of their service desk was going because we developed it for IT and finance as well. So they could use the same reports, they could use the same reporting mechanisms, the same metrics. If they needed something tailored slightly different for regulations or for different needs, then that was surely something we addressed, but it was a lot easier and much more efficient starting with something that had already been developed rather than building from the ground up just for HR.
Great, thanks, Nick. And this is probably a perfect time here to launch our last poll question of the day. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. So the question is, does your organization use a ticketing system to formally track HR cases? So we'll give everybody 10-15 seconds to vote. Great. Thanks, everybody, for voting. We had about 60% of you vote, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So again, the question was, does your organization use a ticketing system to formally track HR cases? 25% said yes, 63% said no, and then 13% said, I don't know. So we'll go ahead and hide that and throw it back to Matt.
Sure, and so I wanted to briefly give kind of an overview of some of the key roles that are involved in implementing HR case management within your organization. And this, in many ways, this echoes sort of a set of roles that are going to wind up being critical across all of the service towers, not just HR. But of course, there are needs that are unique to HR that I thought we would address here. So, there's a process owner that needs to be identified and is ultimately going to be accountable for the end-to-end HR case management process. And so, for a lot of organizations, this is really about accountability for the HR shared service experience. This person really shouldn't be managing HR cases on a day-to-day basis. And to echo a point Nick brought up earlier about a VP-level involvement within a unified service delivery initiative, this really needs to be a person who has authority within the larger organization. And so, you want to be careful that the person who really is responsible for successful execution on a day-to-day basis, which is really the next person, the service manager, that you also have buy-in and responsibility and accountability at an ownership level that probably goes even beyond just the day-to-day accountability. So that next layer, the service manager, this is the person who's really overseeing the day-to-day execution. They may even be involved in handling major HR cases. And of course, from a management standpoint, they're the ones providing guidance to generalist representatives, which is really the next category. So you have within a shared service center, you'll typically have representatives who are HR generalists. They are responsible for the initial casework. Often they can resolve routine cases. And then importantly, they're the ones who are escalating or assigning cases that are more involved or complex to some other team. So this could be a team of specialists, which is the next group down. Again, this could be payroll, benefits, HRIS, whatever the issue may be. The representative can escalate as needed, and importantly, they can also escalate outside of HR as necessary. So I think Nick brought up an example use case of escalating to IT, and this is a capability that through Unified Service Delivery is put in the hands of the representative. And then you, of course, have sort of tier 2, you could call it. You have specialists within HR that are involved in resolving involved or complex cases. And then, of course, this is all being provided as a service to the customer ultimately, which is usually an employee or a line manager, or in some cases an outside party, engaging with HR to resolve issues, to address questions, and generally for assistance with HR services. I think it's also helpful to show HR case management fitting in an overall set of HR systems. So HR case management really stands apart from the core HR or human capital management system. It stands apart from the talent management systems, applicant tracking, learning management, enterprise performance, enterprise compensation. And then, of course, it stands apart from the transactional systems like payroll, time and attendance, absence management, benefits, analytics. And finally, case management is separate, although ServiceNow itself is certainly a great platform for providing a HR-related knowledge base. So I don't mean to limit what ServiceNow is capable of in this particular slide, so much as to point out how case management exists in a service management capacity, separate from the systems where transactions and planning is actually performed within HR. So, we can look at a classic example of an HR issue that is handled from a service management standpoint, handled within the HR team. I think, Nick, is this something where at the university, I think you alluded to an example. Can you speak to, for a second, the university example of an HR case?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So in this example, an employee is contacting the service center. Maybe they're calling or emailing the service center. And the service center is going to get and complete the intake for that item. So if it's an email, it's somebody who's working a queue of intake emails. They'll read the contents of the email, categorize it to the benefits team, for example, or the benefits service with a symptom of maybe can't access it or something else. Or maybe the employee calls and then the HR service center is filling out the intake while they're on the phone. In either case, the key of the auto assignment here is based on the service. In this case, it was a university service, but in your case, it might be a business service. In the symptom, the HR case will get created and assigned to the right team without the service center remembering, okay, who works on this and which team do I need to assign it to. All of that's handled within the system. All the HR service center needs to do is diagnose which service is this employee calling about, which, again, we already did the deduplication and thought about the customer and came up with good names for our services. And second is, what is this customer calling about that service? Is it a question? Are they calling about because they can't access? Are they calling because they need to put in a request around this service? So if we follow kind of the swim lane through to find a conclusion after the auto assignment, this case gets passed to the benefits team, where customer communication goes out. Thank you, we got your case. The benefits team is looking into this. Maybe the benefits team calls the employee back, somehow resolves the issue, and then finally closes the HR case.
Great, thanks. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there's this advanced set of capabilities that I do want to touch on. And, advanced capabilities are something you'll see kind of encapsulated in a request process. You'll see opportunities for these, for building these advanced capabilities across all of the service towers within an organization. Within IT, we know this from the standpoint of what we call a service request. Within HR, we call this HR request. And really, these are use cases where, kind of shown at a high level on the left-hand side, these are use cases where you have often a self-service component. You have an integrated system. Within HR, this would be either core HR or it could be a payroll or benefits system. You have a team that's owning an overall ticket process. So you might have an HR shared service center that's assigned a request and ultimately closes a request. But then you have automated and sort of workflow-defined tasking that's going out and touching on not only other teams within HR, but also potentially teams within IT. And so, when we talk about HR requests, we're talking about the requests that can come in, not just cases, not just I need help with something, or I have a question about something, or I see a discrepancy that I need you to resolve, but to actually be able to submit a request into HR that gets fulfilled and turned around through a predefined workflow that includes potentially integration, that includes tasking to other teams, as I mentioned. So, we'll see this happening with not just onboarding, but position changes, separations. We'll see this happening for staff requisition, requesting from the HRIS team, requesting information, requesting reports. But it goes on beyond that. It's how do I submit changes to my payroll withholdings. So just like in IT, there's the opportunity to identify standard services and deliver requests against those services. Similarly, we have an advanced capability, an opportunity for delivering a high level of automation within HR that brings the workflow capabilities of ServiceNow to bear on really standardized, repeatable requests coming into HR and fulfilling them either within HR or fulfilling them in a combination of HR and IT. So certainly HR request is a huge opportunity from an automation standpoint that we, working with our customers, we really look to provide a whole new level of capabilities often for the HR customers that we work with. And so with that, we have 5 minutes remaining, and I know Mike wants to include a little bit of information at the end. If there's any questions you might have, go ahead and throw them into the question box, and we'll try to answer those quickly. I know, Mike, you'll probably want to wrap up while we wait for those questions to come in.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so in the meantime, just want to point out, here's some good contact information for you to take down while you're thinking of your questions. On the right side, you'll see our social media handles, so if you're not already following us or haven't friended us yet, go ahead and do so, please. That'd be great. A lot of times when you walk away from a webinar, that question comes to mind, so not an issue. You'll see Matt's contact info up here along with Nick, so if you do come up with a question afterwards, feel free to email or call either one of those guys, and I'm sure they'd be happy to help you out.
Great. I think there was just the one question about a recording being provided, and again, that will be through fruitionpartners.com, right? And there's a webinar?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Barb, for the question. So actually, if we jump to the next slide, which is our final closeout slide, recording and PDF will be shared soon. We'll get all that stuff converted for you end of this week, and I would guess an email blast will be going out sometime early next week with both those items. So also just want to point out that our next webinar is on December 12th, entitled Planning Your Services Journey. So for more details on that specific webinar, please visit our webinars page on our website. And it looks like, yeah, checking the question box, I don't think we have any more coming in, so we'll give everybody 3 minutes back to their day. So appreciate everybody joining us today. Hopefully this was a helpful presentation. You learned a lot. I know I did. So enjoy your day, enjoy your weekend, and we look forward to seeing you guys at our next webinar. Thanks.